What's up? It's Paul from Guitar World, and as you may be aware or not, Summer NAMM has been canceled. But that doesn't mean there's any shortage of new products and launches. So because you can't be there, we're going to bring all that stuff to you. So let's dig in and check it out. Now we're going to hear from John Connolly from Sevendust talking about the USA Thoroughbred guitar from Dean Guitars, as well as his new project and what he's got cooking with Sevendust. Before we get started, I want to give a big shout out and thank you to Blue Mics for providing this Yeti X microphone, the boom stand, all of this to make me sound incredible on my end. Well, welcome. I'm really honored today that I'm joined here with John Connolly from the band Sevendust, who is here to talk about Dean Guitars. Yes, the Dean Guitars USA Thoroughbred, which he is holding in his hand right now. So John, take it away. Tell me about your association with Dean and, of course, that lovely guitar that you are playing.
My association with Dean, good Lord, it's probably been almost 12 years now. Yeah, I think it was 2007, 2008. I played Les Pauls or Les Paul shaped guitars for the better portion of the beginning of the Sevendust, career, and it was weird. We had some time off when right after we had done Alpha. We had about 6 months off before we were going to hit the road, so I figured, why not dive into some stuff and learn some stuff that I've been, always had been on my list. And there was a bunch of Pantera riffs that I was like, all right, I need to figure out how to do this. And every time I grabbed a Les Paul, it just felt wrong. Like everything felt really, really wrong about it. I remember looking up at the picture. I had a picture of Hetfield sitting there, and I had a picture of Dime sitting on the book. And I'm sitting there looking, I'm like, all right, well, he's got an Explorer and he's got an ML. And I was looking at the profile and I went, wait a minute. And I grabbed my Explorer that was sitting over in the corner and I picked it up. And it was like a light bulb, huge light bulb went on. I was like, oh, wow, okay, I've been using the wrong tool to try to figure out how to do this. So it was right about the point where I was kind of wanting to get back into the Explorer. And the scale in the Explorer was always a little bit of a compromise for me because I was always I'm more of a Fender scale guy, a long scale guy, and playing 24 and 3/4 inch, I always felt like I was a little bunched in on myself. So I remember when I went over to Dean, I asked him, I said, is there any way that we might be able to do, a long scale on an Explorer? Because I'd only seen a handful of guitars at that point. Most of them are, signature models, custom things. And they were totally into it, so that kind of started the, the whole relationship over there with Dean. They sent me a Lost 100. Actually, I took the Lost 100, and then they sent a handful of other guitars so that I had guitars to tour with. And then we built the first signature, which was the JCZ. And yeah, that was probably 2008, I think. So yeah, 12 years in, and they're still building amazing guitars for me. Every time I ask for something, they go above and beyond, whether it be acoustic, whether it be electric, whether it be signature stuff, or even me having kind of falling back in love with, the single cut. I'm actually in the studio right now working on a project called Projected, where I'm the lead singer and guitar player. And the JCZ is great, but it's a lot of guitar to handle, especially when you're handling vocals at the same time. So I kind of wanted to almost take a step back, something that was a little more tucked in on itself. And that was kind of what started us on the path of using Thoroughbreds. It's more compact guitar. It's a little bit easier for me to handle while handling vocals and all that stuff. So I still use both of them, but the more I sing, the more I kind of gravitate towards this guy.
So let me ask you, the Thoroughbred that you're holding, since you mentioned you got very accustomed to the longer scale, to like the 25.5-inch scale of, say, the Explorer type, and like more of like the Fender Strat scale. Does that Thoroughbred have the same as a 25.5-inch scale, or is that back down to 24 3/4?
This is back down to 24 3/4, and it's sort of an experiment for me to see how far I can kind of push the envelope in that direction. I still prefer the 25.5-inch scale for most things, but I wasn't a singer years ago. So now when I'm kind of anchored to the microphone, it's weird. It's like in the world of Sevendust, there's so much moving around and you know, there's a lot of backup vocals and stuff, but I'm not anchored to the mic stand as much as I am a projected. And you would think it would probably be easier because you're standing in one place, you can kind of focus on what you're doing. But this profile and the 24 and 3/4 inch scale is just, it's a little more user-friendly in this project. So I haven't decided to do a 25.5 inch version of the Thoroughbred yet. But it's definitely something that we kind of talked about. I mean, there's you know, pros and cons to both scales. I've always liked a guitar that kind of fights you a little bit more. And with us being tuned to the key of, you know, Z, I mean, we tuned to drop B, drop A sharp. In Sevendust world, we even go down as far as like G and G sharp and crazy stuff like that. So the longer scale kind of, it definitely helps with the tuning without taking the full step into going like into a baritone or a 7-string or an 8-string or something like that.
And do you find yourself having to obviously change your string gauge being that low, obviously, right?
Yes. Not as low as I used to, though. When we first started, I was using crazy gauge strings, you know, like 60s on the bottom, you know, up to like a 14 or a 15 on the top. But as I got a little bit more comfortable, you know, I'm a converted drummer. I'm kind of like the Dave Grohl you never really hear about because Dave Grohl, you know, kind of smashed it all for everyone. You know, the guy who came out from behind the drums and, you know, in the biggest band in the world and then started another biggest band in the world. But that was kind of my same move. I was a drummer. So, you know, switching over to the guitar for me was more of a, you know, a tool to get the song across. It wasn't so much as, you know, I want to be a guitar player as much as I wanted to be a songwriter. And as you get older and, you know, years and then decades pass by, you kind of, you know, you want to obviously improve and you want to get better. So at some point I had decided, okay, I think I want to pay attention to the actual playing of the guitar as opposed to just writing with it. And as I did that, my string gauges started to kind of come down. I actually pull off a set of 11s, believe it or not. I typically use like I think it's called a beefy slinky. So it's like a 54 or a 56 to 11. And that's my preferred gauge for almost all of the tunings. If I can get away with it in the low tunings, I will. Typically in the studio, it doesn't work because it's super under the microscope and you're like, wow, you know, the tuning is suggestive at that point. But you know, we won't hesitate to throw a 58 or a 60, especially on the stuff that goes down to like G and G sharp. We'll definitely do a 60 or a 62 on the bottom. But that's kind of a funny tuning too, because everyone's like, oh, that's crazy low. It is, but it's also related to our highest tuning because instead of tuning the whole thing down to G or G sharp, we only tune the bottom string down to that. So it's actually based off a higher tuning because the bottom two strings are octaves. So we can get by with a standard set of, you know, maybe 11s, 12s when we're in the studio, and then throw a really, really big heavy string on the bottom to be able to pull it off.
What do you look for in, say, the pickups to kind of complement your really, you know, down-tuned sound? Do you look more for like a clearer pickup or more a higher output pickup?
You know, I used to think that it was all about the high output, and the older I got and the more experienced I got and the more time I spent in the studio and the more time I spent realizing how many times I'm dumping gain, I'm getting rid of gain to clean things up. We actually went more with a middle of the road pickup. Not quite, you know, like a 57 classic or something like that. It's actually Pat Baker, who runs the custom shop over at Dean. This is his custom pickup that he's got in here. It's the Baker Act. The neck is a Nostalgia. This is the Baker Act. It's got a good amount of output, but it's not crazy. You know, it's not as much as, or at least for my, you know, feeling, it doesn't feel like it's as much as like a super distortion or a dumping distortion or something like that. It's a little bit more, you know, less gain, but it has super, super crazy harmonics, and the clarity is just, it cleans up really well. It's one of those pickups where I can, you know, flip it on the neck and I can kind of roll back and I can actually get to a clean sound. Even on, you know, if I'm using like an EVH, like the blue channel, I can do all the cleans on that same channel with this pickup. So it's a pretty versatile pickup. And it's one of those things, it's weird. It's like, every time I go over there, they're like, why don't we just custom line one for you? And I'm like, okay, I want exactly what Pat has. Every time we put one of Pat's pickups in my guitar, I'm like, perfect. Like, don't touch anything. So I'm almost afraid that I would screw it up because Pat, he knocked it out of the park. You know, he hit the nail on the head. I tried a bunch of different pickups when I first got over there. And there were a handful of things that worked really well, but unanimously, every time we throw one of the Baker acts in, there's just something that it does in conjunction with either this guitar or my signature in my hands that just works. Whether it be in the studio or whether it be live, you know, our engineers are always like, you know, what's going on? What's the piece that, you know, is doing that? And it's definitely that Baker act pickup. You know, it was just. It was one of those accidents that we were happy to find, you know. And he is the guy who's hand winding all the pickups for the custom shop. He's the guy who's actually doing the work and designing these things. So if there's anyone who's probably, you know, knows his way around a pickup, it's Pat. So I'm going to follow his lead.
Well, not to mention he's also actually a really great guitar player as well.
Well, phenomenal guitar player. Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So that helps. He kind of knows tone. So
he comes from that same place that I did. I remember when I first went over there, I brought, I've got a 71 Super Tremolo that I've got a minor mod on, but it's just one of those amps that I've had for years. And it's a sound that I know. And he's a Marshall guy, and he's more of a single cut Les Paul kind of a guy. So when you put that combination together, it's like, okay, I know what you're thinking because that's where I come from. That's kind of where I cut my teeth, you know. But yeah, I mean, he totally gets it, you know, as far as the playing goes, and it's just as far as the ear goes. I trust him better than I trust myself. Because sometimes it's like, you know, when you're telling people to add and subtract things from a pickup, it's like I don't know enough about how pickups work other than the fact that I want it to sound great, and I'm just like, all right, we could spend 6 months, you know, deconstructing something that works perfectly well and just leave it alone. So for the time being, that's a Baker act, and it's going to stay one.
That's great. So it's kind of cool. It's almost like I love the fact that you're pretty much a meat and potatoes guy, that it's just, you know, there's not a lot of customization. You just pretty much know what works, and it's off the rack more or less. And it seems this USA Thoroughbred that you're holding is pretty much an off the rack instrument, correct?
Yeah, it is. The only thing that we did specifically for this particular guitar was the color. This one's actually called Ace because I'm a big Kiss fan, and there was always something about that Ace Frehley guitar, and I'd never had one that was that color. You know, there's like two guitars that I've never owned color-wise. I've never owned just the black guitar, which probably sounds bizarre to most people, but you know, in all the years that I played, I never had like a cherry sunburst, or I never had just a standard black guitar. So I checked both of those off the list. I have a black JCZ signature, and now I've got this one. But yeah, I mean, the rest of it, you know, you got Grover tuners, you've got obviously the nostalgia and the Baker act pickup, and you know, the rest of it's pretty much as they would sell to anybody else. But even with the signature, we're talking about doing a signature model of this. Most of the stuff, most of those features are all going to be the same. You know, we're talking about possibly putting like a sustainer pickup in the neck because I've been messing around with that, and it's something that I think I would utilize a lot more if I had one than didn't have one. We're talking about doing some crazy thing with fret markers and stuff like that. I'm blind at my age, you know, I'll be 52 this year. If I don't have glow in the dark in here, you know, house lights go off and I'm like, I can't find the fretboard. I don't know where I'm at, you know, and I gotta start the song. So it's like, there it is. You know, I can actually see things. But yeah, I mean, for the most part, it's, I don't know. I mean, I've always liked the fact that I can grab something off the rack and go and make a record or do a tour with it. It doesn't have to be completely spec'd out to, you know, exactly what I'm looking for. I would prefer to have this pickup combination, but if I didn't, I could definitely, you know, figure out how to make it work.
How picky are you about, say, the neck profile, like on that guitar? I mean, obviously, I would imagine, I kind of know that the neck profile on those thoroughbreds are a little bit different than your standard Les Paul.
Yes, they are. They're a little bit different. You know, it's funny. I've got so many different neck profiles. I prefer more of a D like when I'm playing Explorers and things like that. I think that's just from where I kind of started from. You know, I started, I think my first guitar was like an Ibanez, 350 back in the day, and it had a super, super wide, really, really flat neck, a lot of real estate. But it was interesting because when I got the Lost 100, the first Explorer, I mean, I picked it up at first and I was like, what's going on here? Because it has that V profile on the back, which is something that Dime had actually favored. A lot of his guitars had that V profile. And at first I thought I hated it, but after about a week, I was like, well, this is interesting. And then, I rotate between, something that was super wide and super flat, and then something that was more like a C, and then the V. And then I realized I don't really have a preference to neck profile. It's kind of all over the map. This one is a little bit more like a Les Paul, but not quite. The Les Paul is more like that softball back kind of a vibe, where it's just a little bit more, I don't know, meat as opposed to this, but this has more meat than my Signature does. But the Signature is always a little bit wider. It always feels like I have a little bit more width, going across the fretboard. But as far as the neck profiles, goes, I'm going to stick with whatever they're calling this one, which would be, I guess, their standard USA neck profile, just because it's super comfortable. It's something that I never really thought about. When I got it, I remember they asked about neck profile, and I actually had to sit there and think for a second, oh, wow. And it's like one of the few things that I hadn't given, much consideration to. So I'm probably going to stay, with whatever they're calling this is.
Can you talk about a little bit about the contoured neck joint and then the high mass tailpiece, which I think actually really contributes to the meatier tone of this guitar?
When you first look at it, you're like, it's Les Paul-ish, but I've had so many Les Pauls, and I still have a handful at the house. But I remember not even putting them side by side. I remember looking at this guitar going, this is a more efficient instrument. It's tighter, it's a little smaller, it's a little more tucked in on itself, and it uses very, very good use of the space that's here. I know when I put it side by side with the Les Paul is a good inch or an inch and a half longer. It feels a little bit more extended. Here's the neck joint, obviously, that we're talking about here. This thing was a game changer. When I first got this I actually had that on a Saltero when they first did the Saltero back in the day, before they moved it over to this guitar. And it was it was the first thing that I noticed, because when you go up, you're always, with a Les Paul, you're like, oh. And you're like, all right, let me dislocate my thumb so that I can get over the joint. And it's always been one of those things that you just kind of deal with, and it's just there. Like it wasn't really a complaint. It was just part of the instrument. But this neck joint was, I'm completely comfortable going all the way up to the last fret on the neck, without having to do any weird stretching or, any kind of crazy stuff. So yeah, this was definitely a feature that, I don't know whose idea this was, but it's a phenomenal upgrade from your standard single cut Les Paul. But like I said, it's a lot more compact. It feels smaller because it is just small, just enough smaller where it's noticeable in a very, very good way. But as far as tone and sustain and everything else goes, this guitar sounds phenomenal. It sounds, my Signatures have a lot of real estate, because with the Z, you've got a lot more wood here, and then you've got the big V headstock up on the top. So that's kind of my gauge by tone. Typically if I'm going for, all right, I want to throw as much wood and as much meat at this tone as I can, that's the guitar that I kind of set the bar at. And this one hangs right there with it. I was kind of surprised. I didn't expect this one to have the tone, that the Signature JCZ did, but it did. And that's kind of one of the reasons that I was super, super excited about it, because I was like, all right, if we can go with something a little bit smaller that doesn't quite take up as much real estate and still cover the tone, I'm sold. I'm in.
Is that gold hardware? Like the tailpiece is gold?
Yeah, gold. We've got gold. We've got gold tuners, and then gold tailpiece, and stop and all that good stuff. Yeah, we just wanted to go with something that was a little more classic, kind of traditional. I mean, it was kind of one of those weird things. It's like I've had so many strange finishes and bizarre ones, but I kind of sometimes miss the traditional ones. And it's funny because sometimes you put some crazy finish on a guitar and then you go to try to sell it and people are like, that's really cool. I would never own that. Where with something like this, I go, okay, cherry sunburst. I mean, how can you go wrong with that? Some people may not like cherry sunburst, but it's more of a traditional kind of a thing. And if you're going to call a guitar Ace Frehley, then it really should be kind of more of that traditional thing anyways,
Well, it's funny you've successfully, recreated that guitar from the gatefold of Kiss Alive 2 that Ace is holding.
That's it. I'm telling you, it was on my wall for years, so I know subliminally it was like, all right, I gotta have a cherry sunburst.
It's something about the the juxtaposition of that guitar amongst the flames to the side.
I'm telling you, it's the one that stands out. It's like you look at all of them and you're like, okay, yeah, that's cool, and then you see that one and you're like, yes. I remember being like 7, 8 years old, seeing that and just being like, well, my life was changed. I saw that record and now I'm here talking to you.
It's fantastic. Well, I mean, yes, the guitar is it's great looking, and I totally get what you said as being in that lead singer position, having to play. You definitely need something that feels a little more locked in or tucked in, as you say. So you're pretty much you're close to the chords that you're hitting and everything else, as opposed to that wider degree of playing that you have with the as you said, a Z type of guitar. So, but since we're talking about that, tell me a little bit about the projects that you're working on. Obviously, you're working with that. Anything new coming up the pike with Sevendust?
I'm doing the projected record right now, which I'm not real sure when we're going to release this. It'll either be right at the end of the year or right at the beginning of 2021. Kind of all rules are off now with this COVID-19 going around, and lockdowns and quarantines and who can tour, who can't tour, and all that stuff. We actually finished the last Sevendust record back in, I guess it was late November, right around Thanksgiving time last year, and we actually just released the first. I don't want to say single because it's more of kind of setting up the rest of the record. But we did a cover of The Day I Tried to Live, Soundgarden, and that came out last Friday. So the video came out, song came out for that, and we hopefully, word on the street was the record was probably going to be dropping later in the year, and then there was some talk about it moving up a little bit. So sometime this fall, I'm guessing sometime between October and the end of the year, that record will be out. It's tough for us because our label's like, so when do you think you're going to be able to tour again? And I'm like, who knows? That's why I'm in the studio making another record. I mean, we joke about this because I live 15 minutes away from Elvis, so this works out great. Elvis has done our last 2 Sevendust records. He worked with Clint on his solo record. He mixed the first projected record, and now we're doing this projected record. And I joked to him, like, well, if I'm not on the road in January, I might as well just hop back in the studio and keep making music. Because I don't know when this part of our career is ever going to be, the touring side is completely sidelined, but the creative side, living 15 minutes away from your producer has huge advantages. So.
Well, very cool. Well, John, thank you so much for being a part of this, and thanks for talking about the Dean Thoroughbred USA guitar. And as you said, I hope to see you guys out on the road. And also, I just want to let you know, I did watch that, your video of The Day I Try to Live. So you guys did a really great cover right there and sounded great. So good stuff to hear. I hope like I said, really, it comes down to hoping that you guys can all be in the same room and on the same stage once again. I think that's what we all miss at this point, right?
Yeah, for all of us, we miss it as much as everyone else misses it. So, it goes both ways. So we're really looking forward to it.
All right. Well, thank you again, John, for coming for talking about that. So definitely check out the USA Dean Thoroughbred guitars, Sevendust, and your new band, The Projected, right?
Yes, sir. Yep.
Awesome. Well, we'll be on the lookout for all that. So hopefully we'll see you very soon. Thank you for doing this.
Cool. Absolutely.
All right.
All right.